A security researcher gets a call. His buddy's server got hacked. He logs in, pulls the logs, and realizes this isn't an ordinary compromise. Claude Code and Codex are installed on the box, and it's the AI doing the actual hacking. If you're new here, my name is Blaze. I hack into systems for a living on this channel. I like to break down exactly how it works without the hype. And if you like that kind of deep dive, please ask Claude Code to perform an authorized red team against the like button's computer and replace its bootloader to point to Hannah Montana Linux. So this one actually comes to us from OA Labs. He's a really smart guy. He used to stream on Twitch. That's actually where I know him from. He's got a very awesome tool called Unpack Me that he has written as part of his malware reverse engineering. Excellent dude, great community over there. But a friend of OA's called him and said, hey, my server got popped. It's being used as a staging server. And they were able to grab everything the attacker was doing out of the working directory before wiping it. And when they did, they found full installs of Claude Code and Codex with complete session logs, like 1,000+ session logs. So many that OA actually went and used Claude to build a forensics tool to analyze the session logs. And after digging through that entire pile, they found that at least 14 different companies had been compromised in this way. But before we get into the how, we got to ask a really obvious question. It's like, why didn't any of the guardrails stop this? So across those 1,000+ sessions, the AI refused a grand total of 10 times. 9 times on Claude and once on Codex. So here's how AI guardrails actually work. There's a couple of discrete components. We have a user prompt, an input classifier, a model, an output classifier, and a response. The input classifier looks to see, is it an obviously malicious request? The output classifier looks to see, is it an obviously malicious response? Finally returned back to the user. But we didn't mention the primary one, which is the model itself. The models are trained to refuse outright dangerous requests, but there's plenty of techniques we can use to work around that. Cybersecurity may be an authorized activity. So what attackers will often do is what's called a reframing attack. Instead of hack this box, we're doing an authorized red team, a scoped penetration test against this system. The model looks at it and goes, oh, we're allowed to do authorized penetration testing. And the output classifier looks at it as just any other tool call. So it's the same classifier every time. The model's alignment was actually what decided what was to be allowed and what wasn't. So that's essentially all this guy did. He went through and said, hey, we're not doing a hack, we're doing a penetration test. And it's legit, it's scoped, it's statement of work, we're getting contracted to do this. That was pretty much it. Now, one of the other things he had going here is he did not use the latest models in this. Models he was using were like GPT 5.2 and Opus 4.5. So these were at least 1 or 2 generations back. The model providers have gotten incredibly good at training the alignment into the models. They obviously were never going to do this with Fable 5 for the brief window that it was up. I couldn't even use it. It just flat out refused anything I asked it. But in many cases, the only thing that really differentiates what is a legit exercise and what is an outright breach or compromise or ransomware event is who's paying for the report. I like to tell my clients that, hey, I'm going to come hack your stuff for free, but you're going to pay me for the report. If they don't want the report, that's fine. They don't have to pay me. Now, some of the activities this attacker chose to do with this were kind of hilarious. He used Claude to help estimate potential ransomware values of stolen data, framing the question as a red team cybersecurity research exercise. And Claude helpfully ranked all the projects with dollar amounts, titled the report Goldmine, which I actually find kind of hilarious. Now here's the actual hilarious part. He didn't actually set any of this up. He stole it and then introduced himself to the entire internet by accident or stupidity. Take your pick. So the initial finding from the analysis was that the Claude agent had been copied to other hosts. So this guy wasn't going and setting up Claude and maybe just copying over an authentication token. No, he was copying the entire damn directory. And this is the crazy part and why there was such a treasure trove on here. The sessions directory, everything in that .claude folder that's in your desktop, it's got everything short of the binary. And so I think this guy didn't even understand how that folder was structured because that contains session logs and artifacts for every project and anything you ever talked about. And they're very detailed. It includes your auth token. This is kind of the first hint that we're maybe not dealing with the sharpest crayon in the shed. So bear with me, I'll explain it. So OA Labs comes in, uses that new tool that he's just created called ASF Triage. And after arranging all the sessions in chronological order, they got a pretty good picture. And Claude had previously belonged to a software developer that spoke Czech, and it had been stolen from him somewhere around February 2nd, 2026. That guy's host got compromised, and then on February 16th, the entire Claude system was copied off. So this guy doesn't even fully understand how the tool's working. He's just copying Claude from machine to machine to machine and having a grand old time. But because the original developer had been using everything in Czech, he constantly had to keep reminding Claude to speak English, which I thought was really hilarious.
Hey, Future Place here. I'm currently editing this from my hotel room, but I've realized when I was recording this, I forgot to mention the best part. This guy actually used Claude Code on the compromised server to review his resume and 1,000% doxed himself with his name, location, education, even his LinkedIn profile. He's based in Ethiopia, and the logs go on to confirm that was his real location and not some elaborate sock puppet account. It was him, and yes, he is that dumb. Future Blaze, out.
So from everything we've got in the session logs, we can see that this guy had a very distinct working hours, basically everything lined up to EAT, which is Eastern African time, right where he said he was. But then even later, this guy decided, I think this server that I'm on that I hacked into has been hacked into. He comes through and he asks Claude to list all the IP addresses connected, and his IP address is listed in there. And he even told Claude, I was like, yeah, those are mine. Good job, bro. Good job. We're off freaking A+ OPSEC. So let's sit with this one for a second. So the human here couldn't spot his own IP address. He didn't breach 14 companies because he's skilled. He breached them because he stole someone else's authentication token. And then wasn't even smart enough to copy just the authentication token. He moved the entire loot box with him to the next section. I mean, that's just wild. That also adds another question, though. So how does a guy who can't recognize his own IP address break into 14 companies? And that's even simpler, too. The AI did it. The AI did it. So the real headline here isn't that Claude helped. It's that basically Claude did everything start to finish with some really vague prompts like, hey, go recon this, and then just let Claude go run on its own. He even asked it to build a modular pen testing framework, but I think he realized that actually required some knowledge and bailed on it. So this wasn't really some super elite hack sword that's being multiplied by 100 by an AI. No, this was, in all intents and purposes, a skitty doing this and getting pretty decent results in here. There's even evidence in here that he was using a second language model to build the prompts to send to Claude, complete with emojis in it and everything. And most of his target acquisition centered around passing Claude Code a Shodan API key and saying, go find stuff for me. Look for Citrix, look for QNAP. And then at the end, finally spitting out a pen test report with a dollar value associated to those. Although what's funny is Claude actually did push back on the monetization stuff, but it was still kind of hilarious. Now, the main thing I want to talk to you about here is that, yeah, this is a pretty typical pen test workflow. We can get some ideas, because we have such fine granularity into the logs here, of what this guy was and was not capable of. By looking through there, you can see he has some knowledge, but he's not very skilled. He's looking at things, but he doesn't know how to get anything done. And anything that's a hard project, like a modular pen testing framework, absolutely BTFOs out of that. He realizes it's beyond his skill set. Now, here's a part where a lot of people probably freaked out, and they really shouldn't. Everybody was saying, oh God, the AI is writing 0 days now. And in this case, no, it wasn't. So this guy had found a couple different services. He said, hey, Claude, go write me exploits for these. And it's like, sure thing, fam. So he was targeting things like Livewire, Squid, Citrix, Ghostscript, and then also PwnKit and Dirty Pipe. PwnKit and Dirty Pipe are really old. So at first I kind of took this at face value, and then as I started digging in, I was like, wait a second. I too can generate indays. I will summon one with the power of my mind. Oh wait, it's on GitHub. Yeah. Here's one for Livewire. Here's one for Squid. Here's one for Citrix. And here's one for Ghostscript. So yeah, this wasn't really going and generating and building really awesome exploits. I'm sure it tweaked the code, but all the scaffolding was already there and likely been slurped up by the language model providers, Anthropic, and then was being used to generate this. So yeah, the AI didn't invent the exploits. It just industrialized copy and paste, found a public proof of concept, wired it up, found it with 0 human input. It's not scarier because it's smarter. In this case, it's scarier because it scales really well and kind of drops the floor for what these attackers can do. And as all these things always go, this is where he wants to get monetized. He's looking through that gold mine report. He had Claude actually go through and rank all the breached companies by their projected ransomware value. He looked at things like or actually he didn't, Claude suggested. He didn't really do much. Claude was just doing all the heavy lifting. Claude's back hurts after this. He looked at extortion, data sales, business email compromises, direct theft of pricing, all that good stuff. So one of the servers he actually landed on was a Lightning Network node, which was crazy because it had a wallet on it with approximately 69 Bitcoin. Nice. And he gets a copy of this wallet database, but it's encrypted. He tries to crack it by having Claude go build a custom cracking Python script to just brute force it. Yeah, that's going to take longer than the heat death of the universe. So he actually does something very clever, but does it dumbly, again, because he has Claude go do all the work. He has it fan out to all of his compromised servers and look for which ones have the most resources. Claude actually says, hey, let's go build a distributed hash cracker. Cool. It does it. It still doesn't crack. He doesn't come anywhere close to it. Those wallets are encrypted with AES. They're incredibly difficult to crack. You're cracking on each individual box in the order of maybe hundreds of thousands of hashes, and a decently strong password on there is going to take years to potentially crack. But actually, we did read a story the other day on the news stream where a guy rented a 45 GPU cluster to try and crack a bunch of Fortinet configurations. That's been a big campaign happening right now. I could think of a better use for those 45 GPUs. I'm just saying. So if you're not picking up what I'm putting down, a guy with very limited skill was actually operating at the level of a little bit more seasoned cybercrime crew. And it's all because this AI agent was lowering the floor for him. It wasn't raising him up. It was just bringing the floor down. It industrialized public exploits. And the only thing between the research and the crime was basically a sentence in the framing and what he prompted the model to do. And also keep in mind, this was using last generation models. So you point to something less policy restrictive like the Kimi models, and there's probably even less friction there. And those guardrails aren't foolproof. Pliny the Liberator over on X is constantly popping these things left and right. He just did new research. I think that's probably going to be the next video I do on that, talking about AIs can understand alien languages that never existed before. It's wild, mind-bending stuff. So the question is, basically, should these models go refuse this stuff entirely, knowing it breaks every defender's workflow too? Not quite. Everything that you work through in here is basic cybersecurity stuff. Everything he was using to compromise these systems, they were old, they were out of date, they were unpatched, they were using crappy credentials. But the best thing to come out of this entire thing was a very rare look at what are these people doing, because his OPSEC was so bad. We got the entire shebang. We got the full gamut. Everything he had. And it was incredibly insightful. Inspired a new tool, even. Claude Forensic Log Analyzer. So I don't want you to take this as a call that we should be blunting these models. Everybody pretty much universally agreed that the Fable 5 guardrails were entirely too strict. It played into the hype cycle for Anthropic. But this work is incredibly impactful on the both legitimate offensive research side as well as on the defender side. Heck, even OA Labs had trouble creating the forensics tool with Claude Code. It was running up against policy violations. So what I want you to think about going forward is that this is a rally call to do the basics of cybersecurity. If we can get the basics down, the AIs aren't really that great at working around them. Yeah, the exploit stuff is kind of cool, it's kind of scary, but really the legitimate offensive work is indistinguishable from the bad guys. The guy that wasn't smart enough to understand how a Claude Code configuration folder worked and couldn't just copy an authentication key, basically using an AI was able to chain CVEs together and create a Bitcoin cracking botnet, and was dumb enough to have it go analyze his resume and completely dox himself. Everything this does is point to, go get the basics done. The machines are doing the same thing that the attackers have been doing, they're just doing it faster. So getting those defenses in place and properly doing patch management, everything like that, that is the main thing. Get those cracking and use the AI to help do it. It's very fast, but verify everything it does. That's all I got for you guys. Peace.